Thousands of games are released on Steam every year only to get buried and forgotten forever, and if you don't want that to happen to your game and want to make enough money from it to go full time, by the end of this video you'll have learned from my mistakes in starting my project so you'll maximize what you'll get out of your game's release. The most important thing to narrow down when deciding on what game to make is to find the balance between making the game you want to make, the game you can make, and the game that you can sell. Except it actually looks more like this. So my first mistake was not leaning enough into the game that I could make Circle and focusing too much on what I wanted to make. Right before I started working on Air Obscure, I had just finished a game called Chinchilla Run, which I made in a month, and before that I did some game jams with a friend, so the next logical progression would have been to make a game in 6 months, right? But all my ideas were for huge projects that would easily take over 2 years to make, so having no ideas and feeling uninspired, I started scrambling, messing around, and doing aimless research that ultimately had no clear goal to it. I eventually got really interested in Thief, the Dark project, so I spent a lot of time fleshing out the hardcore stealth mechanics as the game began to turn into an immersive sim. I wanted to have crazy ability and had ideas about multiple enemy types, and it just got way out of hand. So in terms of what you should focus on, put the time into making small games to understand what you're actually capable of making with the time that you have. Make a few small games in under a week over the course of about 4 weeks, then make a game that takes about a month to make, just make a super polished version of your previous games, and then make a 6-month long project that you can actually release on Steam. If you follow this process, you'll have a fantastic grasp of what you'll actually be able to achieve in a reasonable time frame. Now, I should say that there's definitely value in creating something that you're passionate about that will motivate you, but ultimately, if you make a game that you don't care about and finish it, you'll be much prouder of it than you are of all your unfinished projects, so keep that in mind. Alright, so let's look at my other big mistake. I failed to understand what game I can actually sell. I thought that if I finished my game, I'd eventually get enough wishlists for it to do well financially, but I had no evidence for that. I was posting GIFs to Twitter and making devlogs that I really enjoyed, but I wasn't really getting any return from it in the form of wishlists. I decided to call a guy by the name of Chris Sukowski. He's a game marketing expert and he really knows his stuff. I low-key thought that he'd tell me I'm crushing it and have me tweak a few priorities and little details in the process, but little did I know, I was about to learn a very difficult lesson in humility.
I'm gonna be totally honest. The way Steam works is there are certain genres that do better than others. It has to be the right game in the right genre for what you can produce. An immersive sim is the AAA of AAA genre. And so the fan base of a immersive sim are very particular. And by that, I mean, I could do anything. I could beat this game backwards. You know, I could sequence break it. And if you don't fulfill those expectations, the market is going to destroy you with bad reviews.
So yeah, my entire game had to change if I was serious about doing this as a career in the future. At this point, I already had a Steam page, which you can check out and wishlist the game and see all the changes that I made since then. I think ultimately we all want to hear that we're going to succeed, but it's important to be objective about what results you're realistically going to get from your project. St. Francis de Sales has a great quote about getting too excited and too attached to your work. Do not undertake your affairs with disquietude, anxiety, and worry, and do not hurry and excite yourself about them, for all excitement hinders reason and judgment and prevents us from doing well that very thing which we are excited about. Ultimately, I would really encourage you to have a degree of separation between you and your game, because you will need to change it. Chris explained to me how my game would likely take far longer than I expected, and even if it did do well, players who love that genre wouldn't like it. Even though I am still pretty confident that I could have added all the features in that I wanted to, I know I wouldn't have been able to make them polished enough to really make the game stand out, get good reviews, and sell well, and this is really important. The most likely outcome would be that I'd end up hating the game, hating the process, and getting mad at the inevitable flop, and probably quitting game dev entirely. Another thing I failed to realize was that Steam players expect things like full controller support, full key mapping, separate music and sound effect volumes, 60 frames per second across the board, and I had no plans on adding any of this stuff. Not having these features is one of the biggest reasons players give bad reviews on Steam. Believe it or not, when I ultimately did remake the game, about a third of my development time was spent on these accessibility features, so don't ignore them. But time and accessibility aren't the only factors that make a game sell well. The fundamental principle is to make a good game, or more accurately, a game that lives up to Steam players' expectations. People often say that indie developers need to focus on one core unique mechanic, and I would add create the simplest possible game of the genre that you're working in, find something unique that you can add to that genre, and go from there. Another vital aspect to selling a game on Steam is choosing that genre intentionally, and I'm planning on making a whole video detailing how you can come up with your first major game idea using tag and genre analysis, which is extremely important to understand when getting into this field. Okay, so after spending a few more months of work using all of the advice that I got from Chris, the simplified version of my game is a narrative-driven horror game with the immersive stealth mechanics from the original version, and there's only one enemy in the game. The visuals have changed drastically, and that was very much for the best, and the game definitely looks much more polished now, and I really like the art direction a lot better, especially compared to the pixelated look from before. During your development process, it'll be really important important to get player feedback, and actually my game Air Obscure currently has an open beta test that you can sign up for, and I'd really love to get your feedback. Now remember, to make sure that your first big Steam game is a success, you have to find out what that game in the middle of the Venn diagram is for you. Don't just focus on that big dream game project. Find out what kind of games you can sell that you are able to release in a reasonable time frame of 6 months to a year. There are a lot of factors that go into whether a game will sell well or not, and you're going to have to get serious about intentional market research, which you can learn more about in this video here. In the meantime, please wishlist Air Obscure on Steam, and God bless.